everyone. This is Dee Marley with the History Bards podcast. Thank you for joining us today. This week, we are welcoming back and interviewing historical author Eileen Donovan, featuring her book, The Campbell Sisters. Hi, Eileen. How are you doing? It's so glad to have you on the show today.
Hi, Dee. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
Absolutely. So we are so glad to have you. And as a way of a brief introduction to our listeners, Eileen earned her MA in English at Northern Arizona University. Her traditionally published debut historical novel, Promises, won the 2019 Marie M. Irvine Award for Literary Excellence. Her historical fiction, A Lady Newspaperman's Dilemma, won the 2021 When Words Count nationwide competition. That's great. Also, she's had short stories published in various anthologies, and her nonfiction essay appeared in the 2021 Chicken Soup for the Soul, Blessing of Christmas. That's great. She lives in...
Subsequently, I've had another essay published in Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Everybody loves those books, so everybody needs to go check that out and look up Eileen's stories. She lives in Manhattan, New York, and is a member of the Authors Guild, SCBWI, Women's National Book Association, and the Historical Novel Society. Again, welcome to the show. And to get things started, Eileen, we'd love to know more about your book and also, kind of how you started writing historical fiction.
Okay. My book, The Campbell Sisters, is about three sisters, all in their 20s and all just starting to make their way in the adult world, let's say. They all have very different goals in life, and they pursue them with some very unusual glitches along the way that they hadn't expected.
Oh, that's not, so like what era, so that our listeners can know what era you're writing in?
It's set in 1955.
Oh, awesome. Which is unusual. City. Oh, well, that's, and it's really unusual because, a lot of people, when they think about historical fiction, they're thinking even further back than that. So that's kind of really interesting that you're writing in the 1950s. So what kind of prompted you to write in that era?
Well, amazingly enough, I wrote this entire book in the early 1900s, set in the early 1900s.
Okay.
And I finished the whole book, and you finish the book and you let it sit for a bit, and then you read it and you see what jives, what doesn't jive, that kind of thing. And I got finished reading the whole manuscript, and I said, "There's something wrong with this. This is not. It just doesn't feel right."
Oh.
So I just let it sit for a while longer, and then I thought about, what if I moved it up? Because the mores of the early 1900s just didn't seem somehow to me to fit the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, if I move it up to the 1950s, because historical fiction is anything that's 50 years old.
Right, exactly.
Older, so I said I could move up to the 1950s. That'd be no problem. And so I started rewriting the book. And of course, when you make a major change like that, you really are rewriting the entire book because everything changes.
Yes.
And when I finished that, I said, "This is better. This fits." And I'm glad I did, because just recently, I haven't even updated my bio, but just recently, this book won the Colorado Independent Publishers Bronze Award.
Awesome. That's
for historical
amazing.
Fiction. So I was very pleased that
I'm sure you were. Well, congratulations for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So can you kind of, since you've kind of talked a little bit about that, about having to do a rewrite and letting your book sit, because, a lot of authors first starting out, they don't kind of understand that whole process. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about your process in doing that, and the reasons behind it, and the necessity sometimes of doing that?
Yeah. Well, I think when you write the book, you're so, well, at least I'm so consumed with the characters and with the situation that I want to get everything down, and I want to make sure that everything seems to be working and flowing correctly. But you really can't do that while you're writing. I mean, you get all your ideas down, you get the gist of the story down, you get all the important facts and points of view down and all of that, but then you really have to walk away from it for a while. Let it just sit, and then you come back to it with fresh eyes. And even though you know the story, of course you know the story, you wrote it, but you come back to it with these fresh eyes, and you look and you go, oh, but wait a minute. There, yeah, I really
Right.
have to put something in here. I have to take something out. I have to move this over there. There are all these different things that you can see it now because you're a little bit removed from the story than you
Right.
were when you're totally immersed in the story. And I believe that, well, for me anyway, when I'm writing it, those characters are so real to me. They live with me. I mean, I dream about them. I
Yeah.
think about them when I'm in the supermarket. They're just so much a part of my life.
Well,
So
how long have you been writing?
it really seriously about, I guess only about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Before I started writing historical fiction, I was writing children's books.
Oh.
And I was rewriting some old Victorian fairy tales that I had never heard of before. I found this old book, and but I wasn't very good at it. To be perfectly honest, I really wasn't. And the people in my critique group told me, some of them told me that my voice in my children's books was too adult for children.
Oh, okay.
So I said, okay. So for a while, I didn't write anything. I just said, I'm not going to rewrite fairy tales. I'm not going to write anything.
Right.
Um,
So that kind of like, since you were already doing that, that just kind of was like a leeway into writing historical fiction, what was the reason behind you choosing historical fiction?
well, I realized that 99% of what I was reading was historical fiction.
Okay.
And I said, gee, you really like this genre. Maybe
Hmm.
you should think about a story in that genre. But I didn't think of a story until I saw this documentary on PBS about children in England who were being shipped all over the world to their
Hmm.
colonies during World War II. Well,
Yeah.
actually, they started doing this program of shipping children to their colonies back in the 1800s. And then it was then it was all orphans and really poor children, and
Yeah.
they called them just gutter snipes.
Yeah.
They had editorial cartoons about it, and sweeping the street of these children and piling them
Oh,
in
man.
horse and wagon buggies and taking them off to the ships. Um, and they went through the whole history of it up through, um, I think they stopped in the 50s, but actually the program went on into the 1960s. And that story just stuck with me because
Yeah.
so many of these children were so abused,
Yeah.
and the families were not vetted at all. So they went to families where they were just treated like slaves, basically, and the families used them as free labor.
Yeah.
And the story stuck with me for years. And finally, I said, I really should write something about this because
Yeah.
this is a story not too many people know. They know about the children in World War II who were shipped to the manor houses,
Right.
the grand estates in England, but they don't know about the children who were shipped out of the country.
Mm.
So I started reading about them, and I have an entire shelf in one of my bookcases that's just my research books on this subject. And I said, yeah, definitely I have to write this book. And
Yeah.
that was my first historical fiction.
Well, that sounds really, really fascinating, all of this. And that really reminds me of like the stories about the orphan trains here in the United States, how that same thing happened with the orphans here. And so that's really, really interesting that's what led you into wanting to write historical fiction. Isn't it amazing how that happens? It's like when we get so attached to a particular story.
It really is. And actually, I'm going to reissue that book in November.
Okay.
Um, and it's actually going to be very timely because recently I've heard a couple of stories now on the news about the migrant children coming up and
Yes.
how they're being forced to work in meat slaughterhouses and things
Yeah.
like that, usually at nights when nobody really notices them.
Right.
And these are minor children. God only knows how they're getting paid, or if they're
I
getting
know.
paid. Nobody seems to know, but this is just coming to light now. And
Yeah.
as soon as I heard it, I thought about my book, and
Right.
I thought, the same thing happened to these children, and they were talking about how the foster homes, let's say, how these people are not being adequately vented because there's just so many migrant children coming across, that these children are just being sent to these homes without any kind of real venting as to the adults in the home, as to how they're being treated.
Yeah,
And I thought,
so unfortunate.
same
So
story
unfortunate.
all
Yeah,
over again.
it really is. So whenever we're talking about, because I know that's another book that's coming up, but whenever we're talking about the Campbell sisters, I'd love to know a little bit more about the research you did for this, and a little bit more about maybe you could share the book blurb with us for the Campbell sisters, so our listeners will know what it's about.
Oh, sure. Well, the research was, it sounds a little silly to say, but it almost seemed easy, I guess, compared to some of the other books I've written, where I spent months doing research and researching every little nook and cranny. And then when you're writing it, you're still, oh my gosh, did they have that in that time period? And you're delving down 22 rabbit holes to find out.
Right.
Since this was in the 1950s, and not totally removed from my era of existence, I could look at it and say, no, they didn't have that. Of course, they didn't have cell phones. Just like stupid things that would pop into your head, or things that you would just automatically, because we're so used to it, you would and then you say, well, how would they go about finding a job? They didn't have the internet. They couldn't get on their little computers and do this. How did people go about finding jobs in those days? Or how did people do this or that or the other thing? So, so there was a certain amount of research involved, but not as much as it was entailed with Promises or with the Lady Newspaper Man. Those were months of research before I even started to write anything.
Okay. And so could you share the blurb with us for the Campbell sisters?
Oh, sure. Could you wait 1 second?
Sure.
I should have grabbed this book before I came on, but
That's
this
okay.
is the book.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover, by the way.
Isn't it? It's just lovely. Yeah.
Really.
The cover was it was created by Ellie K. Bockert Ausberger from Creative Digital Studios, and she did a wonderful job. I was so happy when I saw it. Yeah, so the blurb about this is, like I said, this is three sisters. Helen Campbell is the eldest and most practical of three sisters, daughters of hardworking Irish immigrants living in New York City in the 1950s. She does what she can to keep the wild child, middle sister Carolyn, in line and support the youngest, Peggy, as she pursues her dreams of becoming a doctor. Then Helen meets Charlie. While it's love at first sight for those two, Carolyn's antics threaten to derail all the sisters' future happiness. However, through thick and thin, the three sisters strive to prevail, though not necessarily in the ways they thought they wanted.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So, in that vein, can you tell us a little bit more about what did you find that was really difficult about writing this book? Was there anything?
Trying to think, was there anything that was... I think it went fairly smoothly. Like I said, I had the bones of it from the 1904 version I had written. Yeah. So I kind of knew a little bit about each character going in. So then it was just adjusting it to the society of 1955 New York City. But I guess the most difficult thing was making sure that I was staying in the 1950s, not in any other era. Right. Not letting the 1940s post-war atmosphere bleed into it, because 1955 was far enough away that there weren't still soldiers just coming home. Right. There weren't still families just getting established after the war. Mm-hmm. So not letting that really interfere, not letting modern day mores interfere. So it was really remembering to keep the let's say the peacetime elements, even though it wasn't really peacetime, but peacetime elements of the Eisenhower era,
right,
in my mind when I was writing.
yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So, let me ask you this. We kind of talked a little bit about how your writing journey and where you started out and everything. Do you have any more advice for younger writers starting out who maybe want to, for any genre, but maybe in particular for historical fiction?
Really, just to stay true to your book. That I think is the most important thing. Don't let other people influence you. I mean, take your critique group's opinions, but take them, digest them, think about them, and see whether or not they work for your book, because it is your book. It is not someone else's book. And just be patient with it. Don't try to write the book in a month. Don't try to write, and try to know when you've said everything that you have to say.
Uh-huh.
I know some people write a book for 10 years, and I'm like, I would go crazy if I was still writing the book. After 10 months, I would be crazy if I was still writing the book. Researching is another fact altogether. But yeah, just really stay true to your own ideas of what you want this book to be, and be patient, because publishing takes a long, long time, and it's and develop a very thick skin, because rejections are just
it really
too numerous to mention.
Yeah, it really is. So that's very good advice. Is that some of the similar advice that you were given along this way? Or was there anything that stood out to you?
No, I guess people just tell me, just keep trying, don't get discouraged. And it is very discouraging, especially with your first book, or even your first couple of books, when they don't seem to be, they're not bestsellers. You're not making $1 million, and you're getting rejected by agents, you're getting rejected by publishers, that kind of thing. It's hard to keep going, but you have to just keep persevering.
I'm gonna pause again. I don't know what's wrong with my throat today. Having a hard time.
Something in the air.
I know, it must be. Well, we do have a lot of pollen down here right now, so maybe
Where
that is it. In Georgia. Yeah, so we're just now getting past. It's finally breaking with the little bit of heat that we've had down here. But yesterday I went out, like I have a lake behind my house, and it was just covered in pollen. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not the right time of the year. Why is there pollen out here? So that could be it. Okay. So I'd love to know if you have a favorite quote or saying that you like to live by, because it kind of tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Oh my goodness. I on the wall right next to me over here, I have a bulletin board that is absolutely covered with sayings from books
awesome.
and other things that I've picked up and that inspire me. Over the years, I just keep posting them. I can't even read some of them anymore, but I kind of look up and I see it. I say, oh yeah, I remember that one. So I mean, there's just so many that I could possibly.
We'll share a couple of them with us.
Well, one of the things, this is from Winnie the Pooh, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, but Eeyore and one of the other characters are out, and it's snowing, and the character is complaining about it snowing all the time, and the other character looks at him. He says, well, yeah, the weather is terrible, but we haven't had an earthquake yet. and I just thought that was so cute. And no matter how bad things are, they could be worse.
They absolutely could
be worse. So
and nowadays you never know, right?
you certainly don't. I mean, I feel like I could have built an ark here in New York. We've had rain for 3 days. Today's the first day we have sun.
Goodness. It didn't rain at all when we were visiting up there last month.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice while we were up there. So I would love to know a little bit more about, you said that you have a book coming out in November. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's the reissue of the book Promises.
Okay.
And it'll have a new cover, and but it's the same book on the interior. So some of the people who have read the original version don't have to run out and buy it. Unless, of course, you want to. But
do you have a
up for
tentative release date yet?
November 4th, and it's actually
November.
on pre-order right now on
Oh,
Amazon.
great.
It's up
Well,
for
we'll
pre-order.
definitely put that link up on our description so that if people want to pre-order that book, they can. And we'll
Oh,
also put a
wonderful.
link to the Campbell Sisters as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So we really appreciate you being on the show today, Eileen, and thank you for bearing with me during my little coughing episodes that everybody's just not going to see on the show. But yes, I had to pause because I was about to die over here.
Well, it was a
But
real pleasure talking with you, Dean. I'm
yeah,
glad we finally were able to get together.
yes, I'm so glad. And next time I'm in New York, we'll definitely have coffee or tea or something.
Please. Yes, let's do that.
Absolutely. And to all of our listeners, we thank you and ask that you please click on that subscribe button. And once again, you can learn more about Eileen and her books at www.ejdonovan.com. And we'll have that link in the description for you to be able to go there, as well as the links to her books. We hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. Tune in to next week's show when we will interview a new historical fiction author. And don't forget to check our book trailer channel. Our next week's episode is actually going to be with Mari Christie, who is with the Shine with Paper Lantern Writers. And so she's with that group, and we're very excited to host her on the show next week. This is Dee Marley with the History Bards podcast. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep making history and keep listening.